This is Frank Consella with the Crested Butte is Home podcast, and this episode, my guest is Sean Crossen. Sean and I talk about his early days of skiing 14ers. This is back before it was quite as popular as it is now. And we also spent a lot of time talking about an avalanche accident that he had a couple of years ago. And if you're squeamish about hearing about injuries and things like that, this is your warning, because Sean and I definitely get into it and don't hold back. So at the end of the show, we talk a bit about fishing and his son Connor, who's an up-and-coming ski racer of his own. But I hope you enjoy this podcast, and I think it's an important one for a lot of backcountry skiers like myself to give a listen to. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the show. Today on Crested Butte is Home. My guest is Sean Crossen. And Sean, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how you got to Crested Butte.
I grew up in the East Coast in Pennsylvania, and then I went to a ski academy in Vermont, Green Mountain Valley School, to ski race. And then I got into ski racing, and I visited Western State to look at going to Western State in 1987 was when I first came out here, the first year that they opened the North Face, and I pretty much wasn't really that interested in the ski racing, but the skiing. And that's why I came out here, and then I went there and got an art degree.
You did get an art degree at Western?
Yeah.
And did you ski race then or not?
I ski raced for a couple races, and there was like 3 guys on the team, and basically it was too much traveling, and it was hard to do school and ski race.
That was back when it was varsity sport and everything. Did you have a scholarship and stuff too? Or?
No, I didn't, because there was 3 guys that had a scholarship, and I was number 5.
Oh, okay.
I probably could have gotten one if I would have stuck around, but I got into doing the extreme comps.
Okay.
The first year I was in that in 90 or 91, I forget. The first year.
You did the very, very first one?
Yeah, the first 5.
Okay. And how'd those goes?
The first comp didn't go well because I literally went off like a hawk's nest cliff and double ejected.
Awesome.
The first, I made it about 40 feet.
Right.
But I think maybe 95 or 97, I got first the first day, had the fastest time, made it into the final or the semi-final into Sakatumi Cliffs. I had a little crash, but they didn't notice, and then I made it to the finals, but I messed up my knee, so I didn't ski well in staircase. So I didn't make it to the final.
Gotcha.
But I made it I think my best was 18th or something.
Gotcha. Well, it's still respectable for sure. And we're going to get back to skiing, but let's just back up a little bit. So you mentioned your art degree. So you still do art, and you're also a painter. So talk about those two things a little bit.
Well, it's kind of a wicked dichotomy that I would love to just do artwork, but in this town or anywhere, I have kids, so it's easier to make money painting houses instead of waiting around for a commission.
Right. Or getting a gallery and having to...
Yeah.
It's a whole other...
Actually, Woody and I had a gallery. Woody Lindenmeyer and I had a gallery called Purple Mountain Gallery right when we graduated from Western in 93, 94 for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And we did framing, and we sold a lot of our work, and actually we were both very successful. But the owner of the Samrock Plaza doubled our rent from $600 to $1,200 after he realized that we were making money, and so that was short-lived.
Bummer. Well, that unfortunately that happens. Speaking of painting, so in the trades here, one thing I wanted to talk about. So you bought an affordable housing lot in Larkspur, and you were able to build yourself. So talk about that process and the challenges with building here in the Crested Butte area.
Actually, I think they wrote an article in the Gunnison Times about me because I had been the only person that had done an affordable housing unit that had built outside of town in the last 2 years.
Okay.
And basically, the hard thing is that they make a cap on how much that you make. So you have to like qualify for $62,000 a year as a maximum of what you make a year.
Right.
And then a year or two later, when you go to build, no bank is going to give you a loan for building your house because you have to build a house that you could actually live in. So, it's probably $300,000 or $400,000. So you're going to have to make $80,000 to $100,000 a year
for what they want to see for the loan.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's a tough situation because it's kind of like you have to, say one thing and then 2 years later do another thing. So, and nobody's going to give you a loan for property just to buy property. You're going to have to come up with cash for that. So then that's a tough thing. And then on raw property. And then to build, it was pretty much impossible. And it took me almost 2 years to close my loan to a 30-year loan because nobody had built property. The banks wouldn't give me a loan to finance a 30-year loan because there were no comps.
Okay.
For anybody that were
sold, affordable
and nobody had sold a deed restricted lot.
Right.
Because people hang on to them.
Right. So what do you think the solution is? Should it be, that maybe the Gunnison Valley Regional Housing Authority, that they offer the construction loan? Do you think that's a solution? Or
actually, I do. I think that would be if they could do that, and work with the banks, because otherwise you're out there in the free market and people just, I went to 3 or 4 different banks, and they would say yes, and then it wouldn't work out, and then I'd go 6 months later, and so I have to go through the whole process over and over again. But yeah, if that was possible, that the Gunnison
GVRHA,
exactly, could do that. I know they don't really have it together very well.
Yeah,
they're kind of like fly by night. But if they could do that, that would help people, because the solution to the problem is not getting places for people to rent, because they're not going to stick around. They need places for people that are have ownership, because if you have an ownership in property, you're going to do whatever you can to stay in this valley and work your butt off to make the loan and make your house nice and have a family and just do whatever.
Yeah.
But if you're just renting, you don't have any ownership and you don't have any means of, why do I have to stay here?
Right.
So once you have a mortgage and you own something, then you want to stay and you want to have that place forever. And so you work your butt off no matter what it takes. You're going to find work to make it work out.
Yeah. Well, and some people do come just for a year or two and rent, and that's okay too.
No, there's nothing.
We need that too.
There's nothing wrong with that. But we need both.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
In the affordable housing realm.
Right.
When you're saying that.
Right. Which they try to do, but there are, and that's why I wanted to ask that question, there are some limitations to what can.
Right. I mean, there's certain developments that are being passed right now that don't have any ownership in their development. I'm not going to name any developments, but I don't agree with that, because personally that it should be involved in all developments, that there should be some kind of ownership so that it's not a slumlord situation.
Fair enough. Well, I wanted to completely switch subjects, and we're going to go back towards skiing. And one of the projects that you started a long time ago was skiing all Colorado's 14ers. So how did you decide on that goal? And when was that too?
Well, in 2001, I got married to Heather. We moved to Colorado Springs because she had a really good permanent job there in 2001. And I got a ski pass at Breckenridge, and I tried to go skiing. And I got in a traffic jam, and I tried to go to Copper, and I got in another traffic jam. And so I was like... And that was a long time ago, way before the traffic jams that are now up there on the Front Range. And I was like, I can't do this on a weekend basis because I worked on the weekdays. So I was like, I need to do something else. And I had worked for the Colorado 14er initiative, and her and I had climbed 34 or 33 14ers in the summertime. And then I had done trail work for the Colorado 14er initiative. So I was like, maybe I should try to ski the 14ers. Nobody else had done it since Lou Dawson. So I'm going to, start a project, and I was going to try to do it in 2 years. And basically nobody was doing it at that time.
Yeah, it was pretty early for sure.
There was a couple people that were trying to do it, and they were doing it slowly. Chris Webster and his wife Pam Webster. And then, it was a small community, and they were easy to get in touch with to go skiing.
How are you getting in touch with those guys?
Actually, friends of friends on the, I don't know if it was the internet, it was email.
Was there internet? Yeah. No, there was, but it was not like
no, it was
Facebook or
my
Instagram.
friend Frenchie, who was a guide at Irwin, hooked me up with Chris Webster the first time, and we skied Kit Carson together, and we hadn't even met. So, and it was like a 19-hour day. Mm-hmm. He didn't make it the last 250 feet, but I was like, I have to do it because I'm not coming back. And charged the top by myself and came back down. There was literally 20 inches of pow on the couloir. But yeah, it was kind of a fun project that I did. And before I had skied one peak, I already had six sponsors. Then my brother, who's a very good writer, kind of hooked up with me, along with me, Atomic and Red Bull and Smith and Backcountry Access. I'm forgetting a couple right now. So
what were some things you learned along the way of that project?
Basically perseverance. It took an average of 3 tries per peak on all of them. Okay. And then some of them took 7 tries. And then my biggest lesson that I learned was how wicked the internet could be. And how people would write things on the internet that were, they didn't care, and like I always say it, write it, regret it, or say it. I'll remember in a second. Okay. But anyway, people would say things that were just, awful. And so I ended up going back after the first 2 years. I did 27 and then 27. So I got to 53. But then there was an issue of a bunch of them I hadn't done from the exact summit. So it took 7 more years to go back and do 53 from the exact summit. And then the final one that I hadn't done was Capital. And then I ended up not doing it because I actually went up with a bunch of friends to ski it and didn't feel comfortable that day and was a little more concerned about my son at the time, and my wife, and my reality of living and not dying.
Fair enough. Well, and obviously I was there. So what were the kind of things that people were writing on the internet? Was it just the exact summits, or were there other things too?
It was mainly the exact summits. Okay. But it was, just people will say anything and anything. There was this guy, Jason Ionic or
Ivonic, yeah.
Ivonic, yeah. And, there were several other people that were doing it at the time, and it was just kind of a mess of words of what people would say or do, and say they did this and that. And to me, it was more of for fun. Yeah. And not like it was a serious project, obviously, because I spent so much time doing it, and, it consumed me. And then the cool thing was that I got sponsored by Cloudveil and Red Bull, so I got to go to Alaska and do heli photo shoots and go heli skiing and do other cool things. But I basically started the whole thing for fun, and it kind of stemmed off to a project and got to ski with a lot of cool people. And then other people got into it after I had done actually 53. Chris Davenport called me up, and he was like, do you care, Sean, if I go and ski the 14ers? And I'm like, of course, Chris, you can do whatever you want, Right. You're the pro of pros, But he was an awesome dude, and at least gave me a call and said, what's up? Because his first 14er that he had skied was with me and Woody and Wendy Lindenmeyer, Wendy Fisher, and we were skiing Un Compadre together. But he's an awesome dude, and he ended up, skiing them in 1 year.
Yeah.
And then pioneering a line that Pete Sauer and I had picked out on Capital that we had tried several times down the face.
Yeah.
But the snow conditions weren't right. And, those guys, he went with, can't remember who he skied with, but the guy he skied with had climbed Everest twice and said that the line on Capital was harder than Everest. So, it was respect to that.
Yeah, for sure. In this week's Crested Butte Real Estate Minute, I wanted to talk a little bit about vacant land and building on vacant land, since Sean and I talk about that a little bit. As he discusses, there's a lot to think about when it comes to actual construction costs here in the mountains, and it's often quite a bit more expensive than people realize, so just a lot to consider if you are thinking about vacant land and construction costs. I do have some tools that I use that I've actually picked up from mountain biking and skiing that I employ when I'm showing clients vacant land, and love to help you if that's something you're looking at. My name is Frank Kinsella. My website is crestedbutterealestateagent.com, and you can find my contact info there. I'd love to help you if you're looking for vacant land or any other type of property in Crested Butte or Gunnison. Let's get back to the interview with Sean. Moving on from the 14ers, you kept just skiing backcountry in general, and almost exactly 2 years ago, you were involved in a pretty serious avalanche accident. So let's just start from the beginning. So this was 2 years ago, so a big winter, fairly good avalanche conditions because of all the snow. And you and Pete Sauer decided to go up and ski this thing up Copper Creek. So talk about why you chose that line and how that day started off.
Well, it'd been a line that I actually, Pete picked it out, but we had been looking at it since the early 90s because I used to go up to this place called the Zack Shack, which is below Zachary Peak. They call it Red Face or Red Mountain off of White Rock, but we call it Zachary Peak because there's a post up there that says, Zachary, and he was the miner that lived down there in Copper Creek. And
where's that post? I don't think I've ever seen it.
Yeah, it's right next to the El Nacho.
Okay.
Which me and a couple of friends pioneered El Nacho in 93 or 94 or something.
So way up there, there's just a post in the middle of the Talus field?
Yeah, and it says Zachary.
Okay.
And you probably only see it in the summertime and you have to mess around. Maybe it's not there anymore, but if you look into some mining stuff, Zachary was a guy that lived up there in Copper Creek.
Okay, cool.
And I don't know if he died, they buried him up there. Or anyway, we went up to go ski this line that Pete said hadn't been skied. I mean, most likely had not been skied. Mm-hmm. It's at the very end of the ridge line before you get to El Nacho, and it goes directly northeast down to the first creek crossing as you come up Copper Creek, right before the Zachary Shack.
Okay.
Right before Queen Anne's Basin. Queen Anne's Basin comes down into an avalanche chute, and then there's like a thin layer of water on the road or on the trail. You'll notice with the three little log crossings. Yeah. So the Couar comes down right before that, and there's basically 3 large cliff bands in it that you have to circumvent with, or if you ski it, or you climb it. Yeah. So you guys are at the top, and what are the thoughts of what are the conditions and how are you guys feeling about this objective that day? I mean, it was pretty windy, so our communication was, it was hard to communicate. And my first thing that I said to him beforehand was that I don't want to ski it unless I know that the line goes the whole way through. And so he poked his way down in there and skied and circumvented around the cliff bands to a perch where he could see the whole thing. And he radioed back up to me and said it goes. From the time that we started skinning in the morning, the avalanche conditions were moderate, which they were, but the winds came up and there were 30, 40 45 mile per hour gusts. So I think that the wind changed the snow from the morning to when we skied at about 1 o'clock.
Okay.
I know it sounds weird that can happen, but there was no wind for a long time before that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the conditions were pretty stable. I mean, moderate doesn't mean anything out there because nobody's been there. So
sure,
it could have been considerable, it could have been high. But when I was at the top with Pete, I basically was 50-50 on skiing it because I didn't know the couloir went the whole way. I didn't know the snow made it through the cliffs. So he went and scoped it, but with the wind and it getting cold, I made a mistake in not knowing that he hadn't skied into the couloir and actually cut the couloir. So I thought he had actually skied into the couloir and he was on a cliff band halfway down, looking at it and saying it went.
Okay, so instead he'd kind of like stayed at the margins, you mean?
Yeah,
okay.
He went to the right and actually didn't go in the couloir.
Okay, but at this point he sees the whole thing and he's optimistic about it, or is he like, ooh, I don't know, or he's like, no, let's do this. This is good.
He's saying it goes the whole way. The snow goes the whole way.
Okay.
You know, like there's snow, you can ski the whole way through the line. And that's what my concern was. Okay, I don't want to ski down to a 200-foot cliff and then have to hike back out.
Okay, and was he saying like, ooh, and then there's wind loading too, or was he like, no mention of the snow?
No. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So you're going for it, and how many? What is it like second turn, and this thing slides, or what's the deal?
No, I skied the top like 10 turns. That's kind of like an open area, and then it gets into a tighter chute or couloir, and then it opens into another room. And at that point, if I would have just cut it and went up to the left and stood on the rocks, it would have just sloughed because it wasn't a very big slide. It was probably 12-inch crown. You know,
right.
It wasn't a lot of snow, but it was enough snow on a 55 degree surface. So I basically skied into it, the top 10 turns, and then got into the tight part of the couloir, into the small little room, and it took out the back of my skis. So I started tumbling backwards.
Okay. Yeah. And what kind of surface was it? Was this like a hard wind slab, or was this more of a powdered snow surface?
It was probably there was hard wind slab on top, and then when I got into the couloir, it was a little softer and more carvable, and then basically what slid was the surface on top of a harder layer, and it was probably 12 inches of powder on top of wind-loaded base.
Okay, so the surface underneath is hard, and that's
yeah.
what. And so at that point, you accelerated pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then what do you remember about the rest of that ride?
Well, the first thing I thought was, okay, here we go. I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like literally, like that was my first thought. And so then I started fighting, but it was kind of futile because I couldn't slow myself down. I was doing 70 miles an hour instantly and bouncing. The chute was kind of like an S.
Okay, so it's curving around.
Around. So I'd hit one wall, then hit another wall, and then I went off 3 separate cliffs, probably a 25-footer, then a 30-footer, and then an 80-foot cliff. And I bounced maybe 40 feet halfway over the 80-footer.
Yeah, because it wasn't a clean cliff. It was like an ugly, not vertical cliff.
Yeah. And so when I bounced, I could feel each time I hit a rock or the cliff wall, and it slowed down, like literally, like they say, how everything slows down. Even though you're going 70 miles an hour, it slowed down to complete slow motion.
Sure.
And then I landed at the very bottom, probably 50 feet from the 80-footer. So I bounced and then went, projectiled.
Which is probably good at that point. You're clearing it stuff at least.
I cleared it, and then I was in about a foot of snow. I was like, oh my God, I'm alive. I can't believe I'm alive. And then
because you're on top of the snow.
On top of the snow.
Yeah, because it's a small slide, so it didn't bury you at least.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm seeing daylight after this, the powder cloud had cleared, And then I was like, I'm alive, but I lost my arm. And so I'm like, okay, where's my arm? My arm was, my humerus broke off and it was behind me. So basically I reached around and I felt my arm back there, and I pulled my arm back in front of me, and, you know, it kind of like crunched and popped, and I pulled it in front of me so that, you know, I'm like, okay, my arm's there. And then instantly I saw there was a huge pool of blood.
Okay.
And so I was concerned because I'm like bleeding heavily out of my arm.
Mm-hmm.
And then Pete's like, I got you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm here. I yelled back up to him. He skied around through the cliffs and then back down to me. You know, and at that point I was like, just get down here, because I knew nothing else is going to slide. Everything is slidden.
Right.
Or whatever you say, slid.
Yeah.
Slidden.
We'll go with slidden.
Yeah, slidden. Everything's slidden. And so he came down to me, and he saw my arm, and the bones were sticking out of my jacket, and there was a big puddle around me. And
so this is compound out of your jacket even.
Yeah.
He's like looking at your bone.
Yeah. And so instantly I look at Pete, and he looks at me, and I'm like, oh no. You know, Pete's like freaking out, and he's turning white, and he's like, okay, what are we going to do? And I'm like, you know, let's tie this thing up. And he takes off his jacket, takes off his shirt, and then takes off his or a long underwear shirt, and then we tie it up, and then we take off another long underwear layer, and then not tourniquet, but tie it up very tightly. So it was slinged up and then tied up. And then he's like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, call 911. And he's like, well, we're not going to get cell service. But 911 has a ping, and you have a heightened ping, which I didn't know till then, that if you do dial 911 way out there, it goes through. So he actually talked to somebody in Gunnison, and they said, where are you? And he said, you know, send search and rescue. We're up Copper Creek like 4 or 5 miles.
Yeah.
And so they sent somebody, and then we went down a little bit and lost service. And so we thought, you know, we knew they were coming. And then I started to ski and realized that my ankle was broken too. But I had lost a ski, and so I had one ski, and then he had 2 skis. So he gave me one of his skis, and luckily he had demo bindings, which is rare on Dynafits.
Yep.
So we adjusted his Dynafits to my boot, and then so I had 2 skis and he had 1 ski. And then we had to ski roughly 500 vertical more down, or further down to the bottom of Copper Creek.
Yeah.
And so I fell 1,500 vertical feet from the top of the peak down to there. And then we skied down to the valley floor, and then we started going down valley, and at that point he was like, let's just hang out at the Zach Shack and wait for people to come. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that, because I'm going to bleed out. And so, you know, I could feel it draining on me and me getting dizzy.
So how much, all right, so first of all, you're like wrapping yourself up with clothes and stuff. Did either of you have like a good first aid kit? Or?
No,
okay.
I didn't, no.
And how much first aid training did either of you have? I mean, obviously Heather, your wife, is a nurse, so you must have picked up some, but...
I mean, you know, I knew enough that I was probably going to die if I didn't keep going, because of the amount of blood loss that I was sustaining at the time.
Mm-hmm. So is it slowing down at all, or is it's just a gusher?
It just would fill up, and then we'd retie it, and then, you know, like, I think, you know, looking back on it, I should have tourniqueted it, like, you know, tied it way tighter.
Yeah.
And then, you know, with the cold, I wouldn't have lost my arm. I don't know that, but people have said that nowadays when you have an injury like that, you usually tie it tighter and really tie it so there's no blood coming out. And
above the injury.
Above the injury, yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, now I have, you know, I don't have the best first aid kit, but I have way more gauze and stuff than I used to, and I have like an ace bandage and tape, but basically I knew in my, you know, bottom of my stomach that I needed to get out of there or I wasn't going to make it, you know. And so then we got down, probably skied out about 1.5 miles into this open field, and I, started to kind of like lose it.
What do you mean lose it? Like you were even more dizzy, or?
Yeah, I was like, I need to like not keep moving because I don't want to lose more blood and get more out of it. And then I sat down and like put my down jacket on and drank some water, and I just felt like I was like kind of like fading.
So shock. I mean, that that was shock really setting in after the adrenaline was wearing off.
Yeah, and after going down 500 feet and then 1.5 miles, and then I started to hear the snowmobiles, and luckily they had high-powered snowmobiles up into the wilderness, which whatever it takes. They were about 1.5 miles past the wilderness line. They got to me, and then Jay and Rob got me some a little bit of painkillers, some fentanyl or whatever, and then tied it up a lot tighter. And they were like, okay, we're going to bring a sled to you, and then we're going to pull you out of here. And I'm like, I'm not going to make it if we do all this. I need to get on a snowmobile right now. So I Canadianed with, can't actually remember right now. I got up on the sled and Canadianed and cross-armed and got up and out of the hole of Copper Creek and then down almost to Gothic. But then there was a side hill that they didn't want to go across. So we actually used the sled at that point and then went down, which it literally took like 40 minutes to get through there.
Just that one little section.
Yeah, one little section. And then we got to Gothic, and then more painkillers, and they were supposedly bringing a helicopter to Gothic, which probably would have been the best thing at that time. I don't think they believed me that I had a, compound broken arm that was in 25 pieces and my leg was broken because I wasn't really screaming or anything. And they had no way of telling, but I could tell that I was fading, and in the long run, I had lost 50% of my blood.
Wow!
So I restabilized, got in a big sled behind a snowmobile, and they brought me to the ambulance at Snodgrass.
Gotcha.
So.
And just to circle back a little bit for people who aren't familiar with some of these terms, Canadian on a snowmobile is side to side, so there's one passenger on each. And then a side hill is really hard to do without some pretty good snowmobilers and good shape. So I can see why that was difficult. So,
well, yeah, it was really rotten and they kept getting stuck.
Yeah, I could see that. So anyway, you mentioned some of your injuries. So you ended up, going to Gunnison. They sent you straight to Grand Junction. And how many? It was half a dozen surgeries, even more.
No, well, it was 12 hours of surgery, and I went in. Okay. The first thing I went in for. I had a broken nose. I broke my ribs. They thought I broke a bone in my face, which I didn't. And then I broke my humerus off my arm, and then I broke my arm into roughly 20 or 25 pieces. My right arm, my elbow, and then my ankle. And so they put 2 plates on my arm and a plate on my ankle and 31 screws.
Wow. And just to go back to some of our first discussion, so you're still a painter. How does your arm and your ankle feel up on ladders and painting?
Actually, my arm feels fine.
Wow.
Dr. Coda did an incredible job on my arm. Nobody else wanted to do it, and he took up the task and put the jigsaw puzzle back together. I'm actually going to see him in a day to maybe take out the plate of my ankle. My ankle doesn't feel that great in a ski boot.
Okay.
And it's not mainly skiing, it's mainly walking across the parking lot.
Sure.
And then I can't jog. It feels great mountain biking, but just the fact that I can keep painting, and I almost took a full year off from painting. It was 6 months till I could work again. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty rough financially, but I had major support from a lot of friends and friends that I didn't know that I had that GoFunded me. And then I also had High Five Foundation pay my mortgage for 2 months, which really helped out a lot because I just built a house and I had a construction loan that was still going, a house loan, so it was a double mortgage at that point, and rent. So I was roughly paying, almost $4,000 a month in rent.
Oh, wow.
And luckily I had a roommate, Pete. So he took care of the house that we were renting while I built the house, and it all worked out. And then Heather came to the hospital and helped take care of me I was there for 12 days in the hospital.
Well, we talked about now you bring a little bit better first aid kit. What other lessons do you think you could share?
First of all is your second gut instinct or your first instinct that, I think first of all when he was like, do you want to ski back down and go back down the face of the mountain, which was perfectly fine. It would have been a great tour back down, I think first of all I should have taken that gut instinct, because when the winds came up I felt like everything had changed. The snow, like it went from powder to it loaded, and then when it loaded it just did that 6 or 8 inches of surface tension that made it all go. And then not being able to communicate because of the wind kind of fuzzied up our process of what we should do. And I think I skied into it because I was cold and just wanted to get out of there, instead of saying, Pete, come back up here and let's get out of here. I'm not into it. It's never, who cares about a first descent? If you're 6 feet under the ground, you're never it doesn't matter.
Right.
I've thought about going back in spring conditions and skiing that line when it's great on a perfect year, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the main thing that I think I've learned is that, when you get into a tight couloir, you should probably always cut it, number one. Okay. And number two, definitely always follow your gut instinct.
Yeah, it sounds like, that was the first thing you mentioned. So
yeah.
What about one that I've always thought about with your story is, if you hadn't had that cell phone, which you barely had, it would have been a different story.
Right.
Do you carry a locator beacon yet?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Brittany and I started doing that last year, and
it's a great idea.
I think that's what we'll be doing from here on out, because so many places just don't even barely have cell service. They just have no cell service at all.
Even in the summertime.
Yeah, exactly. Even on our bike trips and things too. So, all right. Well, that was a heavy story, but let's go back to let's talk about your son Connor. So, what's it like watching him as a ski racer, and he loves skiing too? What do you think about? How fun is that?
That's probably the best thing that has happened to me in my life is getting to watch him go from the back of the pack to up in the front or wherever he is now. But when he started ski racing, he was literally last, and so was the Crested Butte ski team, and Woody Lindenmeyer and a lot of my friends have changed that, and so have the parents, and so they basically have turned a racing program around so that the kids are super fired up, and it's not all about big mountain skiing, and these kids are awesome, and they're starting to win races, and they're starting to get noticed in Colorado against Vail and Steamboat, and yeah, Connor's awesome, and he's shredding super hard.
And then one last subject I wanted to talk about. You're really into fishing, and a lot of the fishing you do, it seems like you like to hike a lot of times to some of these remote lakes and stuff. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, that's one of the coolest things about where we live is that back in the early 90s, we had a whirling disease epidemic in Colorado, and that's basically they were stocking all the high lakes with rainbow trout, and they're not native to here, so they stopped doing that, and they took a 10-year break till 2001, and they started putting all native trout back in the high lakes.
And the native trout is cutthroat and what else?
It's the Colorado River cutthroat or that's what they're putting up there.
Okay.
And so they airdrop them, or they put them there by mule, or they hike them up to like these lakes that are 11 or 10,000 feet. They don't really do well at 12,000 feet. All over all over Colorado. They've done the project with there's 4 different cutthroat species in Colorado that are native. And in each area, they put them there. And so I go up with Connor and with friends, and we hike up to these remote places in wilderness or mountain bike and bring our fishing gear and camp and maybe keep a fish or 2, but mainly catch and release. And it's a super awesome experience. The fish are beautiful, and then you're in a beautiful place with wildflowers, and it's super awesome.
What, if you're willing to share, like what are a couple lakes that maybe people might be familiar with that you like to do that at?
I mean, the high lakes that I like to go to are, like Copper Lake or...
Okay. Which is up by Eastern Pass, close to the site of your accident.
Or, a really cool lake that's on Monarch Pass that it's all catch and release is Boss Lake and Hunt Lake, which you can mountain bike down to.
Yeah.
And those are the greenback cutthroats. And those are just incredible fish up there. And you can hike up from the road or mountain bike and then, catch and release. And there's like hundreds of lakes around that have the cutthroats in them. It's super cool.
Let's start to wrap it up a little bit. So Crested Butte is home for you. So why do you choose to make Crested Butte your home?
Well, Crested Butte is far from the cities which I don't enjoy living in. But also it's like deep in the mountains, and we have so many incredible backcountry peaks to ski or lakes to fish or mountain bike trails. There's literally thousands of miles, as you know, around here.
Yeah.
And there's tons of trails that nobody rides that, are more rugged than the normal ones that you have to hike a lot. But I've made it my home also because of the people and the community, and it's changed a lot. So certain times of year I leave. Summertime, in the middle of the summer, I tend to go other places, but, that's what happens when in the last 40 years the population has doubled, so there's not much we can do about that.
Yeah. Well, you probably learned a lot about community with your injury too. And
oh yeah.
Maybe you would have gotten the support elsewhere, but maybe not. It's hard to say.
Definitely not. I had friends that I've had for 25, 30 years, and they all people that didn't say anything and never said it. I thank them, but they never said anything or bragged about helping me, or they just came out of the woodwork and supported me, and large funds, almost $20,000 of people helping me get my life back together.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, where can people learn more about your painting company or your artwork or anything else?
Well, you can always go to Mountain Colors. They have my card there. Okay. And they're my biggest champion for painting. And then also my artwork, you can always call or text me, and then I will have a show at the Center for the Arts next year. I'm not sure exactly what month, but I'll advertise it heavily in their new galleries, which are going to be incredible.
Yeah, no, it'll be really cool when that's all finished up soon. Anything else I should have asked that I didn't?
No, I don't think so. I think you hit it.
All right, sounds good. And one last question: who else should I interview?
Why don't you interview Pete Sauer sometime?
He doesn't live in Crested Butte anymore.
Oh, it's got to be a Crested Butte.
Or Gunnison.
A Crested Butte local.
Yeah, no, it's got to be Gunnison Valley.
Let's see. Who would I think of that is out there? And have you ever interviewed Gareth Van Dyke?
Oh, yeah. GVD.
The snowboarder.
Yeah.
He's got so much enthusiasm for the sport.
He does.
Or Woody Lindenmeyer.
Yeah.
He's the man.
Yeah.
There's 2 guys that...
Perfect.
I would talk to Woody about the ski program. Like, if it wasn't for him, there would... he's changed hundreds of kids' lives in this valley. Literally.
That's a good reco then, for sure. For sure. Well, thanks so much, and I hope that maybe you and Brittany and I can go and ski the Couloir and not have anything to talk about at all other than a good time.
You climb it from the bottom.
Maybe.
Why not?
Depends on the day.
Just like we used to do it.
Right. Well, awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Crested Butte is Home podcast. My name is Frank Consella, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Please tell your friends and spread the word and leave me a rating if you did enjoy the show. I really appreciate that a lot. As always, you can find my podcast at crestedbutteshome.com, which also has real estate information. If you're looking for anything in the Crested Butte or Gunnison area, I'd love to help. I'll have a new episode in 2 weeks, and I hope you'll tune in then.